Stocks trend upward as people go out and start spending money again. France may have had more cases for longer than they ever thought possible here.
Stocks trend upward as people go
And
out
I've
and
got a
start
monitor
spending
again.
money again.
Biden announces a union contract with his employees for the first time in presidential history, and a staffer resigns over Tara Reid tweets that he put out. I'm Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary. My goodness, it appears that we're going to have a slow news day again. I mean, I looked around for a little while and I saw a few pieces of note that we needed to talk about for the most part. When you look at all the big three this morning, it was all just op-ed, 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 doom and gloom, this might happen, this might happen. And I do have an article in the stack of this might happen, but I mean, it's relevant to what we're talking about with stocks and money and everything else here. But before we get started, head on over to freedomscoop.com. Freedom Scoop is going to be your one-stop shop for all of your news and commentary needs. We are a by the people for the people approach when it comes to our news and commentary, because there are certain websites that are based out of Los Angeles where you know that all the hosts never really had a life like you and I do. The people that shower before they go to work and after they go to work. So head on over there. We've got great shows like The R-Rated Conservative, like The Generational Gap. Stephen Ignoramus will be making his grand return to the Daily Ignoramus today, so go and check that out. We've got Wyatt Birkenhoff, we've got Freckles and Britt, and we've got me. So go and check us out over there. Let's get started with our daily dose of Investors Business Daily. Come on. There we go. Dow Jones today, futures rise as earnings reopens, oil prices lift, COVID stocks rally, Chegg eyes breakaway gap. This is from Alan R. Elliott. Stock futures scrambled higher Tuesday as states edged out from under lockdown restrictions, helped send oil prices and investor optimism higher. Education stock Chegg spiked towards a breakaway gap open. Genmark, BioNTech, and Chembio led an early rally among coronavirus stocks. Walgreens Boots Alliance and ExxonMobil fought for the pole position on the Dow Jones today. Dow Jones futures squeezed off an early 1% gain. S&P 500 futures swung 0.9% above fair value. NASDAQ 100 futures ran up a 1% gain on the stock market today. Walgreens climbed 3% after Reuters reported discussions and a potential $6 billion sale of the retailer's wholesale pharmaceuticals operation. Oil stocks boosted the Dow and packed onto several of the top 10 advances among S&P 500 stocks in pre-market trade as oil prices pushed toward a fifth straight gain. Alaska Air Group traded up 7% after first quarter results. IBD 50 stock Regeneron topped the NASDAQ 100 with a 4.8% gain. Starbucks also traded high on the NASDAQ, up 3.9% after it announced it would have more than 85% of its locations reopened by the end of the week, although operations and hours would be modified. Among chip makers, AMD plotted out an early 1.9% gain. The IBD leaderboard stock bounced more than 5% on Monday, leaving shares about 12% below a 58.73 buy point. Genmark Diagnostics bolted 10% higher after losses stopped short of consensus targets, and the company named a new CEO effective immediately. Carlsbad-based Genmark was among the first ranks of the companies to receive FDA approval for a hospital test kit for COVID-19. Germany's BioNTech skipped up 5%. The company and partner Pfizer announced Tuesday they had launched early-stage clinical trials for their joint BNT162 vaccine to prevent COVID-19. The test involved 4 separate vaccine candidates and 360 healthy persons. Pfizer shares gained 2.3% in market trade. Not noted, Bill Gates is starting to get in and get involved with all of that. Regeneron Pharmaceuticals rumbled more than 4% higher after reporting above forecast earnings and revenue. Regeneron said in April it was applying FDA fast review protocol to development of an antibody medicine aimed at preventing and treating COVID-19. Initial clinical trials expected to begin in June, the company said. Regeneron stock ended Monday 6% from a new high, but with no valid buy point in sight. Chem Biodiagnostics sailed up 15% in pre-market trade. The Medford, New York-based company reported along with its first quarter results that it had received European approval for its COVID-19 antibodies test system. All right, let's look at what CNBC has to say with this before I give my verdict on what we're seeing here. The S&P 500 ekes out a small gain to start the week, supported by strength from big tech. This is from Yoon Lee and Fred Imbert. Stocks rose slightly as an advance in the biggest U.S. technology shares lifted the market into green from losses earlier in the session. The Dow Jones Industrial Average traded 0.1% or 26.07 points higher at 23,749.76 after being down as much as 360 points at one point. The S&P 500 rose 0.4% or 12.03 points to 2842.74. The Nasdaq Composite climbed 1.2% or 105.77 points to 8710.71, supported by strong gains in big tech stocks. Microsoft and Netflix jumped 2.4% and 3% respectively, while Apple and Facebook both rose 1.4%. The continued strength in tech outweighed the losses in airline shares, following Warren Buffett's comments over the weekend that his Berkshire Hathaway dumped the entirety of its stakes in the sector because of the coronavirus outbreak. Airline shares were among the biggest losers in the S&P 500, with Delta, United, American Airlines all dropping more than 5%. Planemaker Boeing also fell 1.4%. While Buffett was optimistic over the long term about the outlook for America, the move shows his concern that the pandemic has changed certain industries permanently and could be a sign that investors are too optimistic about the economy returning to normal quickly. Mr. Buffett is a long-term investor, so his decision reflects his belief that the airline industry is facing future challenges that fundamentally change the value capture of the business, wrote Tom Lee of Fundstrat in a note to clients. Disney fell more than 2% following a downgrade at MoffettNathanson. The firm said the economic hit to the entertainment giant will last longer than expected, with theme parks in particular facing a multi-year recovery. Yeah, we've got a guy that is in the audience all the time that does deliver to Disney. And he's saying it's a little bit eerie, and they're still getting deliveries, but it's a bit eerie from what he says that they're constantly empty when he goes in there to go do his deliveries. So the theme park thing, and that's a huge thing for Disney on top of it. It is, for the most part, from what I understand, what has funded everything else that they do is the revenue that they pull out for theme parks. So for them not to be able to entertain people at Disney World, Disneyland, and every other park that they have across the world is going to make it hard on them to fund any of the other projects that they have going on. So that's going to be a bit sad, I think, when we look at Disney. But the other thing that we need to look at here, and this is what I wanted to say coming out of this here, is we're talking about tariffs in this country. The president and his advisors are talking about putting a tariff onto China at this point. And the airline stock is down following the fact that Warren Buffett made a major sell-off over the weekend and early on in the week. And yet, we see stocks going up at this point because the lockdowns are starting to end. 10 states are opened up to partial to somewhat normal operation. People are being able to go back to work, and they're going out and spending money again. It took a day to get back into it, of course, once everything reflected and everything started happening again. But we saw the futures go down a bit on Monday, followed by the actual trading going up just slightly. So we've got things working against the economy and things that are working for it right together. And the for it's are winning at this point. So once again, once people are out spending money, the stocks go up. Imagine that. It's a miracle. A miracle of modern economic engineering. All right, let's look at what some of the lockdowns could be doing here. And we'll start with Fox News. Ben Shapiro on lifting lockdowns. Some in media want to see Republican governors humiliated over coronavirus. This is from Yale Halon over at Fox News. Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro praised Sweden's handling of the coronavirus pandemic Monday, pushing back against liberal critics who oppose the adaptation of the low-scale approach in the U.S. One of the reasons that there's an increasing skepticism about the full lockdown order is because the dishonesty of the media and the political agenda of some people pushing this thing, the Ben Shapiro show host argued. It seems like there are a lot of people who are rooting hard against Sweden, rooting hard against places opening up so that they want these places to fail. You just get this underlying sense from people in the media that they would love to see Georgia fall on its face, Florida, Texas, because they want to see Republican governors humiliated for not taking the coronavirus seriously enough. As countries around the world scramble to contain the virus, Sweden called for its people to take personal responsibility for social distancing instead of ordered lockdowns, a move Shapiro said gave credence to conservatives who champion individual freedom. What they should be doing is rooting that this thing is not deadly as we've been told, he explained. They should be rooting that this thing doesn't pass as easily or the summer kills it off. I mean, I don't care who's president. I'm rooting to go back to regular life. But you do get the feeling, you do get the feeling that there are some people out there who are a bit too sanguine about exactly how these lockdowns are going to go, and they're looking for an excuse to keep the lockdowns going so they can promulgate policies that they wanted to in the first place. Man, that guy talks fast. While many were quick to condemn the seemingly soft approach, Sweden stood out for what Anders Tegnell, the country's chief epidemiologist and top strategist in the COVID-19 fight, has called a low-scale response that is much more sustainable over a long period. Last week, Dr. Michael Ryan of the World Health Organization praised Sweden's healthcare system, crediting it with making all the right moves from the beginning of the outbreak, and urged U.S. officials to look toward them as a model in fighting the coronavirus, while allowing the public to return to work, a sentiment shared by Shapiro. We're drawing closer and closer to the reality of the situation, gang, which is that if nothing happens in the near future, all we can do is protect the most vulnerable people in our population and let everyone else go back to work. And that's a big part of it, too. And for the most part, and I've come out and said it, I'm not telling everyone not to social distance and not to go through the guidelines that everyone's telling them to do so, but there's no place in a free nation for the government to enforce it. If you don't want to get sick, stay home, or stay back from everybody else 6 feet. Give them the space. Give them the arm length space away from each other. And do it on your own. Personal responsibility is the thing, but there's so many people in this country that want the authoritarians to come in and crack down on anybody who might not be as personally responsible as anybody else. And, I mean, public shaming has a big place in this world. We as a society can enforce some of these behaviors better than a government can, and possibly in a more lasting effect. So, Shapiro is absolutely right on this, and Sweden, I think, is going to be right. Like I said, Sweden is not telling people, hey, go cluster up and get in shoulder to shoulder with everybody. Go in there and do what you think is the most right. Businesses, operate in the way that you think is the most right. We'll help you if you need to, but you do what you think is the most right for you. And that's what we need more of in this country. Now, CNN has, of course, a different view of this. And it's just the dark language of all of this just makes me want to read it in a funny voice. But from CNN, the price of reopening the economy, tens of thousands of American lives. This is from Stephen Collinson, and it's called an analysis piece, but I read it through before, and it's an op-ed. President Donald Trump now knows the price of the haunting bargain required to reopen the country. Tens of thousands of more lives in a pandemic that is getting worse, not better. It's one he now appears ready to pay, if not explain to the American people at a moment of national trial that his administration has constantly underplayed. Depressing new death toll projections and infection data on Monday dashed the optimism stirred by more than half the country taking various steps to reopen an economy that is vital to Trump's evil re-election hopes and has shed more than 30 million jobs. Stay-at-home orders slowed the virus and flattened the curve in hotspots like New York and California. But they've so far failed to halt its broader advance, leaving the nation stuck on a grim plateau of about 30,000 new cases a day for nearly a month. Seriously, this reads like a dystopian movie title, or not a movie title, but a movie trailer. New evidence of the likely terrible future toll of COVID-19 came on a day when Trump stayed out of sight. His wild briefings that hurt his political prospects now paused, meaning he could not be questioned on his enthusiasm for the state openings in the light of new evidence. But in an interview published on Tuesday's edition of the New York Post, Trump said Americans were ready to come out of isolation and get back to normal life. I think they're starting to feel good now. The country's opening again. We saved millions of lives, I think. Millions and billions of lives, Trump said. You have to be careful, but you have to get back to work, he said. People want the country open. I guess we have 38 states that are opening or very close. The interview took place as the White House took new steps to limit testimony to the House from members of the president's coronavirus task force, prompting Democratic Senator Nancy Pelosi to warn on CNN that it was afraid of the truth. The new figures showing rising numbers of infections and forecasts of a significantly higher death toll challenged the president's optimistic take. A new model from the University of Washington, previously used by the White House, suggested that 134,000 Americans could now die by August in a revised toll prompted by the likely impact of state openings. Ooh. The total was more than double the same organization's estimate last month. Wasn't the University of Washington the one that said we could lose 2 million people in the beginning of this? I'm pretty positive that was University of Washington's projection. A draft internal report by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, obtained by the New York Times, buckled the White House narrative that the worst of the pandemic is past and it's time to get going again. It found the daily death toll reached about 3,000 a day by June 1st, a nearly double the current number. The data, combined with figures showing the pandemic is getting worse in many states, showed there's no real scientific case for reopening businesses, bars, and restaurants. It underscored how governors, largely in the absence of a vast nationwide testing and tracing operation, the administration has failed to build, are in many cases flying blind in reopening their states. Those evil governors. Trump's top coronavirus task force advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, said he did not know the assumptions behind the new models, but said they were probably not misleading, in that easing restrictions will lead to spikes in infection. It's the balance of something that's a very difficult choice, Fauci said on CNN's Cuomo Primetime, putting the bargain in the form of a question the American people must resolve. How many deaths and how much suffering are you willing to accept to get back to what you want to become some form of normality sooner rather than later, he asked. I feel I have a moral obligation to give the kind of information that I'm giving. People are going to make their own choices. And Fauci is exactly right. We're in a free country. It's not like China where we can weld people inside of their apartments as much as people are trying right now. We're going out and accepting what the world could do to us. That's been how human advancement has been made for millions of years at this point, or thousands of years if you believe that direction. So, of course, and like I said, this reads like a dystopian movie title. It's so dark, and yeah, if you read the way that he reads it, it's not an analysis. It's an op-ed. But we will see what happens, of course, because as we move along, yes, there are going to be more cases, and there's obviously more testing as well. But yes, people are getting ready to go out. They're willing to accept what might happen to them, as long as they can go out, pay their rent, and feed their family. Some of these people, like I said yesterday, are 2 months behind on a rent or a mortgage at this point. So let them get out, let them accept the risks. And if they don't want to accept the risk, then they don't have to. All right. From the Daily Wire, France discovers coronavirus from China hit their country much sooner than realized. This is from Ryan Saavedra. A hospital in France had retested old samples from pneumonia patients, found that it got its first confirmed case of the coronavirus, which originated in Wuhan back in late December, nearly a month earlier than previously expected. Sorry, that dark movie voice kind of dried my throat out a little bit here. Yves Cohen, head of resuscitation at the Avicenne and Jean Verdier hospitals in the northern suburbs of Paris, told BFM TV that scientists had retested samples from 24 patients treated in December and January who tested negative for the flu, and that one of the 24 samples tested positive for the coronavirus, Reuters reported. Each sample was reportedly tested again several times to ensure that there were no errors. Cohen said that the man was sick for over 2 weeks and that he infected his 2 children, but his wife, who was the only person that the man had contact with, was not infected. The wife worked at a supermarket next to a sushi stand, which was reportedly being operated by colleagues of Chinese origin. U.S. officials said most of the 17 agencies that comprise the U.S. intelligence community say that the coronavirus accidentally leaked out a lab in Wuhan, and that patient 0 infected their partner, who then visited a wet market where the outbreak exploded. A leaked intelligence dossier from the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, which is comprised of intelligence agencies from the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, stated that China had proof on December 6th that the coronavirus could be transmitted from human to human, a fact that they deceptively hid from the world for over 6 weeks, reportedly so they could hoard medical supplies from around the world. A recent CDC study found that the R0 number in Wuhan was as high as 5.7, which is significantly higher than the previous estimate that was in the 2 to 3 range. While the increase may seem small, when played out over numerous rounds of transmission, the increase in the R0 number is actually quite significant. So, and of course we were looking back that we saw possibly cases in the US back in February so much. So with that in mind, we do have to keep in mind that this could be much, much further spread than anybody thinks, and there could be a lot more people that are resistant to it than what the CDC and, of course, the editors over at CNN want you to believe. All right, let's move on into politics. I'm sick of the coronavirus. So, from Fox News, Biden campaign in first for presumptive nominee announces union contract with staffers. That might be a little bit difficult. This is from Tyler Olson. In a first for a major party's presumptive presidential nominee, Joe Biden's campaign on Monday announced a collective bargaining agreement with its staffers in a deal with Teamsters Local 238, an Iowa-based chapter of the powerful labor union. The contract sets up a 6-day work weeks for Biden campaign field organizers, establishes a $15 per hour minimum wage, and mandates that workers are paid overtime if they work more than 40 hours in a given week. Additionally, field organizers will get medical and vision coverage financed entirely by the campaign. According to a joint statement released by the Biden campaign and Teamsters Local 238, the terms of the agreement will increase field organizers' wages by about $1,900 on an annual basis. Excuse me. For the first time in history, the campaign staff for a presumptive presidential nominee of a major political party will be covered under a union agreement that includes overtime pay for all hours worked after 40 hours in a week, 100% employer-paid health insurance, a 6-day work week, a union grievance procedure, and other protections afforded by a union contract. Teamsters Local 238 Secretary-Treasurer Jesse Case said, "We are pleased to announce that Biden for President field organizers represented by Teamsters Local 238 have ratified a collective bargaining agreement effective May 1st. While Biden is now the first presumptive nominee of a major party to operate his campaign under a collective bargaining agreement, he's not the first candidate this election cycle to have unionized workforce. Biden's Democratic primary rival, Senator Bernie Sanders, saw his staffers unionize in March of last year before approving a collective bargaining agreement a little less than 2 months later." Sanders' campaign manager, Faiz Shakir, hailed the lawmaker as being the most pro-union candidate among the 2020 field and said they're honored that his campaign will be the first to have a unionized workforce. A little more than a year later, the Biden campaign is touting its pro-union credentials in the wake of ratification of the agreement up with its field organizers. And to be completely honest, I look at this and I see a publicity stunt to try and get out on top and on the good graces of people who were disaffected by the Tara Reade allegations. People who decided that they didn't want to go and support, or, and this is a big one too that you need to remind yourself of as we were going into this, a lot of the union support of the U.S. did sour for Hillary Clinton as we went into the 2016 election. I see a lot of people who are union or are former union who went for Trump this past election cycle and were planning on continuing to do so coming through here. But This brings an interesting point, and this, of course, gets the entire labor union across the country on board, gets them in board, and makes sure that they want to be the ones that are supporting Biden because the evil Trump is going to be anti-union. And look, Biden's so union, his campaign staff is even unionized. Unfortunately, given the fact that he's 77 years old with Alzheimer's, he has reversed policy positions so much, and we'll talk a bit about that in the next article. Over the last half century, he's been in politics, and just the fact that he's an outright gaffe machine with a sexual assault claim that I still think can't be verified floating over his head, I think this was a pandering move, to be completely honest. I think it was too little too late. All right, next one. From the National Review, the real reason Joe Biden won't release his papers. This is from David Harsanyi. What is Joe Biden's case for the presidency? The most obvious answer, of course, is that he's not Donald Trump. That's a perfectly legitimate argument to make, and it might be enough to get the job done. Biden has already hinted that he views himself as a placeholder for the next generation of the Democratic leaders. If, however, Biden's case for the presidency is predicated on his nearly 50 years of public service, he is a failure without many peers. This is not my position. This is Joe Biden's position. There are numerous reasons that Biden might resist opening his Senate papers from 1973 to 2009 and his vice presidential papers from 2009 to 2016 that have little to do with the accusations of sexual assault made by Tara Reade. None of them are very persuasive. His papers do not cover personal dealings in the private sector. They cover his time working for the people of the United States. The University of Delaware had initially promised that Biden's records were to be made public after 2 years after he retired from public office. This was in 2017. On top of that, the justification Biden offers for holding back the release of his papers is astoundingly weak. There are documents that existed, for example, when I meet with Putin or when I meet with whomever, he said in his recent video interview with MSNBC, and all of that to be fodder in a campaign at this time. Dear Lord, we weren't just subjected to 4 years of panic-stricken news cycle warnings us that Russia and the president had schemed to crush American democracy, yet here's Biden arguing that he won't share documents amassed while he was forging foreign policy because they include conversations with Vladimir Putin, our most dastardly geopolitical foe ever. Looking back at the Obama administration's history of placating the Russian strongman, a habit we can reasonably suspect was far more pronounced in private than public, we should probably assume that the papers would explode the already tenuous myth that Biden has a history of being tough with Russia. The predicament of releasing his papers isn't that they might be taken out of context, as Biden alleges, but that they will give far too much context. Even beyond Putin, Biden's papers are sure to include the candidate's thoughts on most of the consequential political debates of the past half-century: war, abortion, segregation, China, criminal justice, and the culture war. Perhaps his papers would shed light on why Biden voted for welfare reform in the Defense of Marriage Act and an immoral border wall. Maybe it will give voters some context as to why he voted to repeal Glass-Steagall, the supposed root of the 2007 Great Recession, or why he advocated against greenlighting the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. These days, Biden likes to pretend he was a fierce opponent of the invasion of Iraq because it's politically expedient, when in reality he turned critical only after the democracy building went south. Biden stood in front of Congress in 2002 as a chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and argued for war. The historic record already shows Biden was far more than just civil with segregationists early in his career. He engaged in obsequious efforts to gain their trust for committee seats and worked with them on issues such as busing. While in the Senate, Biden supported virtually every expansion of the drug war and mass incarceration, co-authoring the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. Biden gave passionate speeches on the Senate floor arguing that one could be progressive and lock the SOBs up. Now, Biden claims to regret 1990's crime bill, calling it a big mistake. Maybe Biden's papers can provide some ideological framework to his recent embrace of an extremist abortion position as well. In 1976, Biden voted for the Hyde Amendment, a somewhat toothless law banning federal funds to pay for abortion. In 1993, he voted to save the Hyde Amendment. Today, Biden supports overturning the Hyde Amendment and believes that taxpayers should fund the procedure on demand until crowning. There still exists a Biden amendment, which was added to the Foreign Assistance Act in 1981 to ban American aid from being used in research related to abortions. In 1982, Biden proposed a law allowing states to overturn Roe v. Wade. In 1984, Biden supported the Mexico City policy banning federal funding for organizations that provide abortion or expand abortion services. Both in 1995 and 1997, Biden voted for partial birth abortion bans, vetoed by Bill Clinton. There are probably some interesting correspondences in his papers dealing with 40 years of pro-life advocacy. And that's something that Joe and I discussed on Ed's World last night. The fact of the matter is, and honestly, and I've made the same argument for Trump at this point, because one of the things that they love to bring up about Trump is the fact that he got sued and prosecuted in 1973 for racist tenant policies that he had in New York City. And he went on, and he paid his debt to society, and he moved on. People can change over the years, so I don't necessarily like judging somebody by what they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. That's why I want to push this Tara Reade allegation out the door, along with the Christine Blasey Ford one, because it was decades ago. People have changed, and people have had immaculate service records since then. But I'm not on the left. And that's a very important thing to note when we look into this here, because there's a reason that people are trying to go after Trump for his racial positions in 1973. And it's the same reason that Joe Biden doesn't want his records out. To the left, your position from the start of your public life, and even before that, because they'll go digging for stuff even further to go back further than that, is your position for life, and you can never ever escape it. So, if theirs are unflattering and his partial birth abortion arguments here are documented, his voting for the war, and anything else he's done, his stance on gay marriage because he's a product of the 60s and the 70s. None of this stands with the progressive agenda today, and like I said, there's a good chance that he's changed. Externally, of course, maybe internally he hasn't, but externally he has for political gain. But there's a good chance that his political positions have changed over the last 20, 30, 40 years. But in order to be intellectually consistent, they would have to hold him to the standards of what he said 30, 40 years ago. So there's a good reason he doesn't want these records released. And the National Review hit it right on the head. All right, I got a couple more here to get to. From the Daily Wire, CNN sends Trump campaign cease and desist letter for deceptive ad showing CNN agreeing his actions saved lives. Campaign slaps back. This is from James Barrett. CNN has sent a cease and desist letter from the Trump campaign over an ad featuring footage from CNN's coverage of the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic that the network claims is deceptive because it suggests a CNN analyst agreed that President Trump's actions saved potentially millions of lives. A lawyer for CNN's parent company, Warner Media, has written a cease and desist letter to President Trump's re-election campaign over the misleading contents of a new campaign ad, the network announced Monday. Warner Media says the Trump ad is misusing CNN news coverage in a way that's false, misleading, and deceptive. Pot? Meet kettle. My administration will take all necessary steps to safeguard our citizens from this threat, Trump says at the start of the new campaign ad, a coronavirus response-themed ad released Sunday titled America Come Back. The ad then cuts to various critics of Trump's initial ban on travel from China, including a presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, Joe Biden, who accuses Trump of xenophobia. That criticism is followed by a clip from CNN's Wolf Blitzer and Dr. Sanjay Gupta discussing the social distancing steps recommended by the federal government and taken by the states. It is accurate that if these steps had not been put in place, it could have been 2 million people down here in the United States, asked Blitzer, while images of an airport showing canceled flights and Chinese airliner flash across the screen. Yes, says Gupta. But as CNN's Brian Stelter explains, the network maintains that the framing and the editing of that exchange is misleading, given the impression that Blitzer and Gupta are specifically referencing Trump's travel ban rather than the broader social distancing measures recommended by his administration, Stelter reports. The ad purposefully and deceptively edits the clip to imply that Mr. Blitzer and Dr. Gupta were crediting the president's travel ban issued in January for saving millions of American lives, when in fact Mr. Blitzer and Dr. Gupta were discussing recently implemented social distancing guidelines and stay-at-home orders issued by the state and local governments. Rick McMurtry, Associate General Counsel for Warner Media, wrote in a letter sent to Trump Campaign Communications Director Tim Murtaugh, CNN hereby demands that you discontinue airing the advertisement with CNN clip that has been distorted in such a way to mislead the public. I have one thing to say to that. Injecting Clorox. That's all that I'm going to say about that. All right. So some people may remember this. Some people may not remember it. I actually brought the tweet back up so I could read it back to you guys here. A New Hampshire representative has resigned at this point for a tweet that he made about the position of the woman's vagina. So, from Richard N. Comey, judging by the position of the female vagina, it would not be easy for anyone to just put their finger into the vagina unless there's some cooperation from the female herself. That is why I believe Tara Reid's allegation is false. She is looking for attention. So, due to that, now we're looking at the fact, this is from CBS Boston, CBS 4, New Hampshire State Representative Richard Comey resigns after tweet about Joe Biden accuser. A state legislator in New Hampshire resigned Saturday after he posted a tweet that he dismissed sexual assault allegations against Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden as unlikely because of the way women's bodies are constructed. Representative Richard Comey, a Manchester Democrat, tweeted that a woman's anatomy would make it difficult to digitally penetrate her without some cooperation from the female herself. He said that was why he believed former Senate staffer Tara Reid's allegation against Biden were false. He also accused Reid of looking for attention. Biden has denied the allegations. The tweet, since deleted, prompted House Speaker Steve Schertolhoff to call for Comey's resignation late Friday over what he described as outrageous and offensive. What he described as an outrageous and offensive tweet about sexual assault and survivors of sexual assault. I'm appalled by Representative Comey's comments. They were dismissive and hurtful to survivors of sexual assault across the Granite State and across the country, Schertolhoff said. The comments are not fitting for New Hampshire House of Representatives, and immediately upon learning of them, I called him and asked Representative Comey to resign his seat. In a letter sent Saturday to Schertolhoff, Comey said he was resigning because of the tweet. I also want to offer my sincere apologies to anyone whose feelings may have been hurt by the tweets. I am and will continue to be a supporter of victims of sexual and domestic assault, Comey said in his letter, which was shared with the Associated Press by a member of the Speaker's office. The tweets were very poorly worded and do not reflect who I am and what I stand for. I ask the forgiveness of all who have been a victim of sexual or any other kind of assault. So, and that's been I think maybe one of the problems that we've had with social media is the fact that these people get their opinions out there and they don't get a chance to be sanitized by the mainstream media anymore. They just put them out there, and people sometimes say stupid stuff, and it does cost them their careers as they go along. I'm sure there's stuff on my Twitter that would bar me from public service, but of course that's not going to stop me from trying. But yeah, I mean, Twitter is forever too, and even if you think you deleted that tweet, somebody screenshotted it. I was using a screenshotted image of the tweet that Comey put out. So, yeah, the internet's forever. Somebody screenshotted it at some point, and they will use it against you. So, be honest, obviously, but if you're going to say something that tremendously against the narrative that you're working for, expect there to be something coming down out of it. All right, I got one last one here before we go and read Twitter trending, and I go and get some breakfast. I've got from Fox News, Flynn bombshells cast doubt on Mueller prosecutor Brandon Van Crack's compliance with court order. Explosive, newly unsealed evidence documented the FBI's effort to target National Security Advisor Michael Flynn including a top official's handwritten memo debating whether the FBI's goal was to get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired, calls into question whether Brandon von Grack, a Justice Department prosecutor and former member of the special counsel Robert Mueller's team, complied with a court order to produce favorable evidence to Flynn. Since February 2018, Van Grack has been obligated to comply with D.C. District Court Judge Emmett Sullivan's standing order in the Flynn case to produce all evidence in the government's possession that is favorable to the defendant and material either to the defendant's guilt or punishment. The order also requires the government to submit favorable defense evidence to the court, including possible impeachment evidence that could undermine witnesses, even if the government believes the evidence not to be material. Van Grack has long informed Sullivan that the government's so-called Brady obligations, referring to prosecutors' duty to turn over exculpatory materials to defendants, have been met. In an October 2019 filing, Van Grack denied governmental misconduct and assured the court that the government has complied and will continue to comply with its discovery and disclosure obligations, including those imposed pursuant to Brady and the court's standing order. In the same October 2019 motion, Van Grack elaborated on those claims, telling Sullivan that the government had not affirmatively suppressed evidence or hid Brady material. He denied that the government was aware of any information that would be favorable and material to Flynn at sentencing. Van Grack further dismissed arguments by Flynn's attorney, Sidney Powell, that General Flynn was targeted and taken out of the Trump administration for concocted and political purposes as conspiracy theories. What Van Grack didn't inform the court about and didn't provide to Flynn was the newly unsealed January 4, 2017 closing communication from the FBI Washington field office, which recommended the FBI closes its investigation of Flynn as its exhaustive search through the government databases did not yield any information on which to predicate further investigative efforts. Van Grack also failed to provide evidence to Flynn's attorneys that anti-Trump former FBI agent Peter Strzok then immediately intervened and instructed the FBI case managers handling the Flynn investigation to keep the probe open, followed by indicators that the Bureau would seek to investigate Flynn for possible violations of an obscure 18th century law known as the Logan Act, which has never been utilized in a modern prosecution. Another Strzok text mentions that the FBI's 7th floor, meaning FBI leadership, may have been involved in the decision to keep the Flynn case alive. Instead, Van Grack characterized Flynn's alleged false statements as critical to the FBI's legitimate and significant investigation into whether individuals associated with the campaign of then-candidate Donald Trump were coordinating with the Russian government in its activities to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. So, the problem that I have with this, of course, you presume that Van Grack is innocent until he's proven guilty. That's the same with every other standard here. But right now, I've also got no reason to believe that Van Grack doesn't have other stuff unsealed with the explosive documents that we saw come out this past week. Of course, he said that there are no more documents, there's no more evidence that would exonerate General Flynn. But then we just had one show up last week, so right now I've got no reason to believe him or anybody else in the FBI at this point. There's no reason to believe that they're working in good faith. I have no reason to believe it, and I don't think a lot of the country does either. So I would not be surprised if there's more stuff getting ready to come out. If we get a subpoena out here and we get some more stuff out of here. We may get an appeal and we may get the conviction of Flynn overturned. I could see that happening. Absolutely could. But yes, there's absolutely no reason to believe that Van Grack is telling the truth. And this whole Flynn thing, this is going to be an interesting thing to watch. I do hope we get to see more of it as we go along too. I hope that this doesn't get completely buried. But I have reason to believe that the media has stuff that they can start releasing to make sure it gets buried because, hey, remember, the day after the documents came out that said that the FBI was planning on trying to railroad Flynn into lying or trying to get him caught in a perjury trap or any other plans that they had out there for him, all of a sudden Joe Biden decided it was time to go up onto MSNBC. Keep that timing in mind. Alright, let's look at Twitter trending. So let's get up on here and let's get this refreshed so we can see what's going on here. Trending in the United States, the next 2020 plague, which of course we found out is going to be murder bees. The plague of Karens, that's a funny one here. The plague of menstruation, suddenly every man on earth begins to menstruate at the same time. Charming. Mr. Race Bannon showing a picture of Trump supporters saying these idiots will cause the next 2020 plague. Jenny with an eye says, please, oh please, let it be sexy firemen. The next 2020 plague. Carmen says, can the next 2020 plague be, or can kindness be the next 2020 plague? I would love that. Yeah, that would be nice. I feel like we may have something. We may have to do a little bit more work before we see kindness in 2020, but it could happen. And the last one that I'll read here is Mega Madness with a picture of Trump and various speech balloons saying the next 2020 plague. All right, next one trending. Cinco at Home is an advertisement, so we're going to skip that one. Morning in America with a U. Brooklyn Dad Defiant, of course, the top one on the trend. It's past the midnight in America, but it's morning in America because we're cursed with a thin-skinned brat in the White House who's rage tweeting because the truth hurts. Your failure costs lives and a strong economy given to you by President Obama. Fuck you and your strong economy given by President Obama. The Lincoln Project is right. So apparently, and I'm not sure what the Lincoln Project is. I haven't looked into it at this point yet, but apparently there's a Lincoln Project coming out involving George Conway that apparently presents Trump in a bad light, and everybody's jumping on it for the Twitter trend. That's actually the next one trending here, so we'll get into that. A Real Defender says, who else can't wait for Never Trump Republicans Bill Kristol, Evan McMullen, Rick Wilson, and George Conway to have an epic meltdown in November when Trump wins re-election. Morning in America, the Lincoln Project. All right, let's look at the Lincoln Project. So George Conway and the Lincoln Project are a disgrace, and those that work with them want to destroy the President Trump and are actually trying to destroy American. President Trump is just standing in their way of doing that. Matt Whitlock says, public service announcement, if you're covering the Lincoln Project for any reason at all today, a group that uses 92% of the money they raise to line their own pockets is known in the biz as a scam pack. So we'll talk about this on Contemporary tomorrow because I'm actually going to do some research and figure out what the Lincoln Project is. I just kind of saw it trending this morning as we looked. Bill Kristol says, would Abraham Lincoln have been friendlier to the Lincoln Project or to Donald Trump? So I do. I really want to see what this Lincoln Project is. This looks like a bunch of stuff. All right, last trend here is going to be Donna Reed. Donna Reed, dead 34 years, never anticipated becoming Twitter's top trending term. You know what's fun about Donna Reed is that she was a pretty early female Hollywood producer who had a lot of control over her career at the time. I suspect she would have given Trump as hard a time as, oh, Jesus Christ, it has to do with Trump, as these present-day reporters, imbecile. Okay, so here's what happened with this. President Trump tells New York Post, I'm nothing like 50s American archetypal mom Donna Reed. Fact check true. And the picture with quotation in it says, he singled out two CBS News journalists as people who particularly irritated him, Weijia Zhang and Paula Reed, during the briefings. It wasn't Donna Reed, I can tell you that, Trump said, referring back to the film and TV star best known for playing Mary Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, and later starring as the mom in an eponymous family TV sitcom of the 50s and 60s. Paula Reed, she's sitting there, and I say, how angry? I mean, what's the purpose? They're not even tough questions, but you see the attitude of these people. It's like incredible. So, apparently Trump compared modern day journalists to a former Hollywood actress who played a traditional mom in the 50s and 60s. And that's why that is trending. And that is going to be it for the day. So thanks everybody for coming out here today. We will be back here later on tonight with some more Eddsworld gaming. We're going to play the vanilla game of Fallout New Vegas. After 8 weeks of playing all the DLC, we're going to actually play the real game that the developers wanted us to play in the beginning. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a little bit of God mode because we got so advanced in the DLC, but it'll be a lot of fun. There's a lot of speech checks in there, and there's still a lot of entertainment to go. So we will milk that game for every ounce of content that it has. Otherwise, we will be back here tomorrow with more of the great news and more of what's happening around the country and probably more COVID. But until then, I'm Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary.